Daf Yomi Tractate Menachot, page 57b, with the words Lechem Haponi. That's a better line into it. Lechem Haponi midas yoveshi ushmano lechalaviki vidomao midas yovesh no niskadisho. The Gemara asks with regard to Rabbi Akiva's opinion, the vessel into which 1/10 of an ephah of flour for baking the showbread is placed in a measuring vessel for dry items, and we have heard that Rabbi Akiva said the measuring vessels for dry items were not consecrated as service vessels. This means the showbread becomes consecrated only when it is placed on the table in the sanctuary after it has been baked. If so, at this stage, the prohibition against leavening is not relevant. Sholach le Rabbi Ruvain. Rabbi Ruvain. You don't see him too often. Rabbi Ruvain. Sholach le Rabbi Ruvain mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. Kachi yatzah shel Mishnah. Today I saw someone who looked kind of like a Ruvain that I know. I'm seeing right there. Boom. Sholach le Rabbi Ruvain. Mishum Rabbi Yochanan kachi yatzah shel Mishnah v'efoch. Asher takrivu lav lechem haponi nechimus. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Akiva Omer lav mincha nesach nechimus. In answer to this question, the Gemara states that Rabbi Ruvain, he's not very common. He learned to be, it's very interesting. I saw someone who kind of looked like a Reuven that I know before I learned the Daf, and the Daf had Rabbi Reuven in it. Okay, in answer to this question, the Gemara states that Rabbi Reuven sent a letter to Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, which he cited a statement in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. This is the correct version of this Braita, and one should reverse the names of the sages in it. The phrase, that you shall bring, serves to include the showbread. In the prohibition against leavening, this is the statement of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And Rabbi Akiva says this phrase serves to include the meal offering brought with libations in that prohibition against leavening. Consequently, there is no contradiction between Rabbi Akiva's statement here and his statement with regard to measuring vessels for dry items. Ve'azda Rabbi Yochanan letameh, tam Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yossi Aglili, ve'echad mitamid Rabbi Shmuel amru davar echad, umanu Rabbi Yehoshua. The Gemara comments Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is the one who maintains that the measuring vessels for dry items were consecrated, follows the line of reasoning stated elsewhere, as Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and one of the students of Rabbi Shmuel both said the same thing. And who is it? And who is that student of Rabbi Yishmael? Is Rabbi Yehoshua. Titanya v'yimshechem mikadesh hoisam. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer midas halach nimshach ben bifnim ben bachutz. Midas yovesh nimshechu bifnim ben nimshechu b'achutz. As it is taught in the Brayso, the verse states with regard to the consecration of the tabernacle and its vessels before their inauguration. And it came to pass on the day that Moses had made an end of setting up the tabernacle, and had anointed and sanctified it, and all its vessels, and the altar and its vessels, and had anointed them and sanctified them. Number 7:1. Rabbi Yehoshua says the measuring vessels for liquid items, for example, oil and wine for libations, were anointed and thereby consecrated both on the inside and on the outside. The measuring vessels for dry items, such as the flour for meal offerings, were anointed and consecrated only on the inside, but were not anointed on the outside. Rabbi Yonatan Omer, somehow Rabbi Yonatan, even though he's not as common, he doesn't seem as rare as Rabbi Ruvain. Anyway, I'm sure many will agree with me. Rabbi Yonatan Omer, Midas Alach Nimshchu Mimifnim Nimshchu Bachutz, Midas Yavesh Lo Nimshchu Kolikal, Teid Lecha Shrei Mikadeshos, Tichsiv, Mimoshvo Sechem Doviu Lechem Tirufa, Shnaim, Shnei Eschoinim Soilis Tiyena Chames Tea, Fen Avikul Hashem, Mosai Hein Hashem, Leachar Shnei Afu. Rabbi Yonatan says the measuring vessel for liquid items were anointed on the inside and were not anointed on the outside, whereas the measuring vessels for the dry items were not anointed at all. Rabbi Yonatan cites a proof for his opinion. You can know that the measuring vessels for dry items were not consecrated at all, because it is taught that these vessels do not consecrate items placed inside. As it is written, you shall bring out of your dwellings 2 wave loaves of 2/10 parts of an ephah. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven for the first produce to the Lord. Leviticus 23:17. When are they considered consecrated to the Lord? Only after they are baked with leaven. This demonstrates that when the flour is placed into the 10th of an ephah measuring vessel, the meal offering is not yet consecrated. B'maika miflegi, b'maika miflegi, b'maika miflegi, b'maika miflegi, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai. B'maika miflegi. They would be able to tell indeed that he was in those circles. But my commitment to be some of Yehoshua, always some new to me that's Yavesh Chutz. For your innocent, some of me that's Yavesh Choilu, lo yitzrich chol mute, yitzrich chol mute, me that's nach Yachutz. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yonatan disagree? They disagree with regard to interpretation of the word them in the phrase, and sanctify them. Otam. Numbers 7:1. Both Tanaim agree that the term them serves to exclude something from the anointing and the consecration, but they disagree over what is excluded. Or Yehoshua maintains that them serves to exclude the consecration of the measuring vessels for dry items on the outside, meaning only the inside of the vessels is consecrated. And Rabbi Yonatan maintains that the measuring vessels for dry items are non-sacred, meaning non-consecrated at all, and therefore it is not necessary for the verse to exclude them. Where it is necessary for the verse to exclude something, it was with regard to measuring vessels used for liquid items to teach that they are consecrated only on the inside, but not on the outside. Lema nami Rabbi Kiva ve'echad mitamid Rabbi Shmuel amru davar echad manu Rabbi Yonasan mishum delo shavu b'binyas lach yadodi. The Gemara asks, since the dispute between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yochanan concerns the halacha of measuring vessels for dry items, let Rabbi Yochanan say also, as he did with regard to Rabbi Yosef Lili and Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva and one of the students of Rabbi Yishmael both said the same thing, and who was that student? Rabbi Yonatan. The Gemara explains Rabbi Yonatan did not say this due to the fact that their opinions are not the same with regard to measuring vessels used for liquid items. Rabbi Kiva maintains that these vessels are consecrated both on the inside and the outside, whereas Rabbi Yonatan rules that they are not consecrated only on the inside. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye, Oikabiso Delachu Malei Kegoin Shalash Al Gabe Katevulia. It's a flat leather spread. Rav Papa said to Abaye, how can it be suggested, according to the opinion, that the measuring vessels for dry items are not consecrated? The showbread is consecrated only when it is placed on the table. But before that, there is the stage in which the dough is placed into the receptacle, the bisa, in which it is needed. Since this vessel is used for liquid items, the dough should be consecrated at that point. Abai said to Rav Papa, this is referring to a case where he needed the dough on top of a flat leather spread, which does not sanctify the dough. Yachi dikamale Rabbi Yonasan teida lecha shrei eino mekadeshes. The Gemara asks if so, with regard to that, which Rabbi Yonatan said to Rabbi Yehoshua as proof for his opinion that you can know that if it is so, as it is taught, that these vessels do not consecrate items placed inside them. Let Rabbi Yehoshua say to him, in refutation of his claim, this is referring to a case where he measured the flour for the 2 loaves in a vessel used for measuring 1/10 of an ephah, but what it was a vessel that was non-sacred. And it is for this reason that the loaves are not consecrated. Hachiyashta! Bishlam bisa lekosvach man levet bisa leminash be kilash le al gabe katvulia lesladba el isaron kivon demachmone evan isaron nuchayil be shon isaron nikoidesh dichayil isaron nichoil. The Gemara responds, how can these cases be compared? Granted, one can say that the showbread was needed on a leather spread rather than in a receptacle, as the merciful one is not right in the Torah that one should specifically use the receptacle to knead the showbread. Therefore, when one kneads the dough of a meal offering on top of a leather spread, we have no problem with it. But in the case of the 2 loaves, whose flour was measured in the vessel used for measuring 1/10 of an ephah, since the merciful one states explicitly to use a vessel of 1/10 of an ephah and measure with it, can it be suggested that the one preparing the meal offering should leave aside the consecrated vessel for 1/10 of an ephah and measure it with a non-sacred vessel for 1/10 of an ephah? Tanu Rabbanon. The sages taught in the Brisa, Minayin L'malam, Yimsach Chatos B'sach Oshum, Sakosh Yikadoshim Yikadoshim Kalim, U'imos Ho'imer, U'imos U'shtei Lechem, U'milechem Aponim, U'shiorem Inochois, Shehu B'lo Yisaise. The Gemara, the sages taught in the Brisa, from where is it derived that one who offers up outside the temple courtyard a portion of the meat of a sin offering, or a portion of the meat of a guilt offering, or a portion of the meat of offerings of the most sacred order, or a portion of the meat of offerings of lesser sanctity, or a portion of the surplus of the Omer offering, or a portion of the leftover of the 2 loaves, one is Hashem. Meaning the public offering on Shavuot of 2 loaves from the new wheat, or the showbread, or the remainder of meal offerings, and that in all these cases he violates a prohibition, although these items are not meant to be sacrificed on the altar. Talmud Lomal, he also so the whole devar shlo yisaktiru mimenu shel Hashem kol shu mimenu ishim harehu bibal taktiru. The Brisa answers, the verse states, rain 11, and any honey you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. Leviticus 2:11. The extra term of it teaches that any item that has already had some part of it burned in the fire on the altar is included in the prohibition. Do not burn, stated in that verse explicitly with regard to honey and leaven. Ish behem liishim, Matanya yasu shtei lechem lechem aponim, shemen liishim. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the 2 loaves and the showbread, is there some part of them burned in the fire? But isn't it ton of brides, a portion of every offering is sacrificed on the altar except for the 2 loaves and the showbread, as no part of them is burned in the fire? Rav Sheshes ein migufa liishin. Rav Sheshes said, although no part of the 2 loaves or the showbread themselves burn in the fire, nevertheless they are included in the prohibition against offering them up to the altar, since they are not viewed as independent entities, but rather as parts of larger offerings. The 2 loaves accompany the sheep sacrificed, and they are burned as burnt offerings on Shavuot, and are permitted for consumption only once those sheep have been burned on the altar. Similarly, the showbread is permitted for consumption only after the bowls of the frankincense that were on the table with it have been burned on the altar, so they're considered as some kind of burnt, because burning is connected to them. That's what they're saying here. The Gemara discusses the prohibition against offering up on the altar parts of offerings after their sacrificial portions have already been burnt. It was stated with regard to one who brings up any part of any of the items listed in the Braita onto the ramp leading to the altar, but not leading to the altar itself. Rabbi Yochanan says he's liable, and Rabbi Elazar says he's puzzle. Exempt. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayav the Tani Mizbeach HaMizbeach Eli Ela Mizbeach Kevesh Minayin Tavanoma and Mizbeach Ya'alu Lerason. The Gemara elaborates. The Rabbi Yochanan says that he's liable as a Tana Braita. He considers walking up the ramp. The ramp is part of the Mizbeach too. Why? In Braita, that it says in Braita, after the verse, any leaven and any honey you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. The next verse states, as an offering of first fruits you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up to the altar for a pleasing aroma. Leviticus 2:12. I derived only that this halacha applies to an item that is brought on the altar. From where is it derived? The same applies if it is brought to the ramp of the altar. The verse states, but they shall not come up to the altar for pleasing aroma. To be accepted, the ramp is the means to ascend. They should not come up, so the ramp is part of the altar. That's why he's chayav. Rabbi Elazar, my time. Why so? It's a good reason. Why does Rabbi Elazar say it's positive? And what's the reason that Rabbi Elazar says that one who brings up parts to the ramp is exempt? As the verse states, for any leaven and any honey you shall not burn any of it as an offering made by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first produce you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up to the altar for a pleasing aroma. Oh, it has to be a pleasing aroma, I see. Leviticus 2:11-12. Osam ho de Rabbi lecho kevish mizbeach abba midach inilot. The Gemara explains the term them indicates that this halach applies only to those offerings that come from leaven or honey, and which are called an offering of first produce. This category consists of first fruits, which are brought from dates and other sweet fruit, and which are called the choicest fruits of your land. Exodus 23:19. And the 2 loaves, which are leaven, and are the first meal offerings brought from the new crop each year. In other words, it is with regard to this category that the verse amplifies for you the halacha that the ramp of the altar is considered like the altar itself. But with regard to other items, meat of sin, for example, meat of sin offerings and guilt offerings, the ramp of the altar is not treated like the altar itself. It's only with items that have to do with honey or leaven. When honey has to do with first fruits, first fruits are not offered at the altar, so that's not, the ramp is not considered in that case. Okay, very good.